So my name is Oscar Clark. I'm Chief Strategy Officer here at Fundamentally Games. What does that mean? That means that I've been involved in the games industry for a very long time, and more precisely, I've literally written the book on the topic of games as a service. I always have to pull that out just to show that I have at least written some of this down in the past. I've been thinking about and working on and practically managing the development and production and marketing and the full range of experiences of games for a very long time, about 22 years. And so what I try to do and what we try to do in Fundamental Games is to share our knowledge, share our experience, and hopefully that means that we learn more from you as well. This is a two-way thing. Every time we talk, we find out more. Every time we share with other people, we see more people hopefully having a better understanding of how to be successful in the games industry. So today we're going to be talking about marketing community for your game. So what does that mean? Well, let's start off with a basic premise. I think community is the heart of every game. Now, of course, I'm biased because I'm specifically talking about living games. When I talk about games, I'm really focused on living experiences. So that means experiences which aren't just a one-off and then forget about it. I'm most interested in games which have retention, have reasons to sustain audiences, and that usually means that there is an ongoing business model. I'm very focused on professional development. I'm very focused on commercial development. I want to make money out of games. That sounds terrible to some people, but I don't think it's a bad thing. Because I think if we put the community at the heart of any game and we deliver professional experiences, the content we create is valuable and we deserve recompense for that, provided we focus on giving value to players. And that's what I'm interested in, how we find the best way to give value to players. How can we do that? We don't know who our audience is. We don't put our audience at the heart of every decision that we make. So, I think we know this, people who've worked in games for a long time already know this, but the fact that the gaming demographic has changed so dramatically, where something like 2/3 of the population between 54 and 64 identify as gamers. Had you said that to me back in 1984 when I was on my Apple IIe, yes, I am that old, and I had my couple of modem, playing online games. Yes, I was playing online games in 1984. Seriously, it was before the internet, I know. Actually, it wasn't before the internet. It was before the World Wide Web. I won't bore you with the distinction. But the point is, everybody plays games. So do we market games to everybody? No. What we try to do when we make games is we try to work out who we're making them for. This is the first step of understanding your community, but understanding the gaming experience that you're making. You need to understand who we're making it for. Now, I have a particular technique. We're going to go into that in a bit of detail, and it's based around the idea of personas. That means we're going to come up with a thought experiment of who we're making our game for. So we're going to start with an audience. We're going to start with our primary persona. So this is the person who we're making the game for. Now, for me, I have more than one persona I look at. I imagine a person. In this case, it's Ahmed. Ahmed is 24. He's an IT support person. He's a self-confessed gamer. He's a C1, C2D. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's a specific thing to the UK. I think the US has a similar model. But C1, C2D really refers to workers by brain, C1, workers by hand, C2, but they're generally skilled, or unskilled workers, which is D. Now, what that means is that he's a broad category of that kind of background that I'm looking at. Now, I should be more specific. I probably should say how much they're earning on this kind of stuff. No, I don't necessarily know what they actually are. This is a thought experiment, as I said. This is an idea. This is a hypothesis. We named him Ahmed for a reason, because I can now picture Ahmed, because Ahmed is built up of a range of different people. It's an invented persona, but I kind of know Ahmed personally, and I kind of can understand what's going through his mind. So I can think about Ahmed in such a way that I can see what he thinks, I can see what he feels, I can see what he does, I can think what he says. And when I'm looking at my game design, actually making the game, designing the game, I'm thinking about Ahmed, because he's the person I'm designing it for, not me. I might have similar traits to Ahmed, but it's his needs that I'm trying to satisfy in the game. This is actually a key part of marketing. It's part of product ownership, product design, is to have a clear picture of who it is we're making. And it becomes incredibly important when we start thinking about communicating our game and marketing our game. I choose to have 3 personas, as I mentioned. My secondary persona in this example, and obviously each game is going to have a different set. In this example, it's Jackie. She's 44. She's a journalist blogger. She's an active gamer. She doesn't like to talk about it, though. She's kind of a bit secretive about it. But she tends to fit into the BC1 category. So she's a bit more kind of precise in the kinds of commercial disposable income and cultural educational positions. She's probably slightly more educated. And again, I'm using these letters B and C1 because defining personality types and motivations to purchase or motivations to play or social demographics. It'll be different mechanisms and levers you can use to help crystallize your idea of who these people are. And again, thinking about what they think, what they feel, what they say, what they do. Now, I do these 3 types. So the first one is the mechanic of the game. So what we do. The second one is for the context of the game. What I mean by the context is the sense of purpose and progression, the game economy, the narrative. That's the person who I'm designing that for. Now, I want my first persona, I want Ahmed to basically like the context loop, don't get me wrong, but I don't need to build a context loop to keep him. If I'm going to scale the game, if I'm going to increase the audience scope for this game, that's why I'm thinking about Jackie. And I go for the third persona to look at what I call the metagame. So the metagame, for me, is the things like the social network effect. What makes you love this game so much that you feel like you're letting your friends down if you didn't turn up to play the next day? You know, what is it about that game that you feel like you really want to share? You want to celebrate, you want to evangelize this game because it's something you genuinely love. It's got a really important part of your daily routine. Well, that's what we're thinking about for our tertiary persona. In this case, it's Riley. Riley is a 19-year-old student, but also is a content creator in this particular example. And they're low subs. They're not huge. They're busy. They've got an audience. And they're looking for things that are going to help excite their audience. And that's why they're looking at your game or this game. We're trying to design our game in such a way that we can actually excite this person to think about how our game can help fit into what they do, how they can grow with us and become the player, the voice of that game. That's the sort of thing we might be considering when we're looking at our different personas. So these are just 3 examples of 3 different ways we can slice up who we think our audience is. And as I say, I've tried to map that against the different parts of the way I think about a game because I find that useful for game design. Obviously, if you have different views, obviously, please feel free to shout out about that. We can talk about that in a bit more detail later as well. Now, one thing that's worth noting before we go any further, though, many of you will be aware that things have changed in the industry. So with Apple removing IDFA, with the introduction of Skyrim Network, we've seen the Apple iOS user, for those of you who are looking at mobile device-based games, we've seen that fundamentally change the level of privacy. We've also seen an introduction of a principle in the UK called AADC. That's basically age-appropriate design code. These, plus the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Rights, are all about privacy changes. We're having to think very carefully about how we capture data, how we can target people. So the persona process is very useful still, but it may not be quite as applicable as it was a few months ago because we have to be sensitive to people opting in rather than opting out. What's happened with this increase in privacy, we see with the Skyrim Network, the average percentage of people who are actually signing in, opting in, is only about 20%. Now, there are examples where you can improve that dramatically, but we have to bear in mind there will be an impact, at least in the short term, on how effectively we can target people. But that makes it more important to understand the people we are trying to approach, because we have to rely on communicating to those individuals where they are and messages that they're going to care about. So we want to basically understand what's going to interest them and how we maintain that interest. What was interesting is earlier today, actually, it was, was it yesterday? No, I think it was yesterday. Yesterday we had, I was hosting the Pocket Gamer Track for Ad Insight, and the guys at AppsFlyer pushed this slide out. So they'd learned two things: that to have profitable UA, so user acquisition, which is part of marketing, you need to work closely with the game team to optimize the first few days of gameplay. So even people focused on specific user acquisition, so direct response acquisition of players, have realized that it's really important to connect the game design to the marketing. I think this is a really critical thing. That's always been the case, but now we're in this very correctly privacy-focused world. We're going to have to really double down on connecting the dots between the game, the community, and the marketing messages. And the other thing I thought was interesting is that they really can't rely on predictive models. In fact, a guy called Eric Surfer is a friend of mine. He's a lovely chap, a really smart, incredibly bright person when it comes to understanding what's happening in terms of user acquisition and marketing profitably. Was talking about how important it is that we really focus on the creative and how we really focus on targeting based on interests. So what people care about. So hopefully what we established here is we need to think about the audience, we need to define them in ways that are useful, and to structure that so that we can actually build a game that's going to deliver what that audience needs as the first step. So what's that going to do with marketing community? Well, I'm saying that this is marketing community. I'm also going to say that through the development process, we want to tie our promotional and community building to that process. And actually, what I think we should also be doing, this is a general principle that I hold to and we're increasingly applying, which is to think about making sure that you build a game that you know the audiences actually care about and that you can do this early. In fact, there are lessons that we've gained from looking at hyper-casual games, which you could argue are throwaway content, who cares? But actually, the way that they're built is incredibly useful. Whatever kind of game you're making, by focusing on KPIs to prove that the game is going to have potential before you commit all of your time, effort, love, passion, money to it, the more likely we can be successful. And in fact, if we can fail a game as quickly as possible and then do a new game that's going to learn from the lessons from the previous one, and therefore keep doing that until we find the one that's going to work, then we are more likely to be successful and be able to keep making games that work. That's what I'm after. So let's build on certainty. How do we do that? Well, the first thing I'm going to suggest is that we think about proof of interest. So that means we identify potential players, so the personas we talked about, but we also try to identify actual content creators that fit the kind of games that we want to make. Now, this is particularly important for PC and Steam games because the ability to target users directly on social media platforms is much harder, but it's still something that's relevant to even small indie mobile games, potentially. But obviously the amount of options and choices and targeting that you've got will be different. Depends on your budget, depends on your opportunity, depends on how physically active you can be socially. If you go out there and you spend time on your social media, if you're an active TikTok user, if you're an average Twitch streamer, these can be really powerful, especially if you can be authentic and connect to people. But if you can find other people who will be interested in the game that you're making and find out more about them, then you can make sure that you're honing your game to suit that audience. I also really recommend doing an initial CPI test. What does that mean? That means whether or not you built a game, build a trailer, a 30-second trailer, put it on Facebook. The reason why I choose Facebook is because it's quick, easy, and can spend very small amounts of money. And I'll just spend, say, £50 a day for 3 days just to get a sense of how much interest there is in the idea, even before we make the game. This is a really powerful technique, and it doesn't just have to apply to hyper-casual games. So let's say we get our test and it looks positive. And typically I'm looking for around 30 pence or 40 cents to be a, yes, this is good. But even if it's less than 50 pence or say 60 or 70, say 70 cents, then I'm okay with that, but I'd want to optimize before I moved forward. If it's more than say $1, kind of in trouble, because that idea is going to probably be too expensive and very hard to optimize. It's not impossible, but generally set your target early. Work out whether you get it or not. And because you've set your target early, set your KPI before you do the test, because that means you don't justify why it's okay. It's really important to set a price that you're happy with and stick to it. Because if it's higher than that price, you really shouldn't compromise. Just try something else, optimize it, but move on. Next, so let's say we've gone through a series of games, we rejected some, we found one that works. Now we're moving on to testing the game. So in here, we're going to look at getting the feedback from those players. We're talking about getting creators to give us feedback. So how do we do that? Well, we do things like using a tool like Playtest Cloud, or we use a tool like Antidote to get other real people to play. We actually maybe give builds to specific people. We use Keymailer to access specific individuals who might be interested in streaming the game eventually. We get their feedback, we build that feedback into what we're doing. But what we want is what's called a Net Promoter Score. This is basically when we ask someone about what do they think. Would they recommend this game to a friend? So the important thing about recommending to a friend is that you're more likely to be honest, because your reputation is on the line if you're going to introduce a game to somebody else. Whereas you don't want to upset people. You want to be nice to them. Oh, it's a great game. Yeah, fantastic. I wouldn't touch it again. But would I recommend it to a friend? Maybe not. So you've got to be very careful about how people respond on surveys like this, but it's really interesting to do so. And Mike, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's not my advice. I mean, I've stolen it from lots of people. I just think it's really, really smart, the testing via trade. So next, once we've got a Net Promoter Score that looks positive, where people 7 out of 10 people, people grade 7 out of 10 that they would tell somebody else about the game. Result happiness, we can move forward. And then we're trying to test retention and engagement for the game. So what you're saying, hey, what's this got to do with marketing community? Well, what we're doing is we're not reaching out or building up slowly. We're building up a connection slowly and quietly. We are doing acquisition testing all the time we're doing this process, because in order to get a bunch of people to do essentially a beta test, a retention beta test, we've got to recruit them. That means we are testing the process of creating, optimizing, and targeting ads. It means that we're having to have the right messaging. We've got to have the right store page information. We've got to have a temporary web page. We've got to make sure we know what messages to put into the trailer so that we can get people's interest and desire and action so that they go and play. So we're testing the waters, we're practicing, we're optimizing what we want to communicate to get people interested in this game. So the next stage, once we've done all that testing, we get to the point, and I think this is one of the critical points, where we're going to test ROAS. I don't know if anyone knows what ROAS is. If there's anyone who does and they want to put their thumb up, or one of the reactions briefly, that'd be really interesting to see. Okay, so no one's putting their thumb up, so I'm going to assume. Oh no, we got one there. Good. Anyway, for those who don't know, ROAS is return on advertising spend. Now, it's quite crude saying that, but really what we're saying is for the money, the effort, and the other processes we put into the game, are we getting enough return? So we need to, again, set what our KPI is going to be, our target KPI for that ROAS test. I'm generally looking at somewhere at like 120% day 30 return on advertising spend, as my kind of minimum, but I'm really aiming for like 2 times my advertising spend, ideally. So somewhere between those 2 levels is what I'm tending to look at. Why? Well, because if it costs me more than I'm getting back from users when I advertise, I'm doing something wrong. If I'm getting back twice as much in revenue, as I'm spending in marketing, I have the chance of building and optimizing that and having a profitable game potentially. But obviously I want to scale and improve that over time. Anyway, so thinking about the game in terms of this launch, your pre-launch process and getting the return on advertising spend, and then making sure that we've got the repeat engagement. So that's sustained retention. That's going to be really, really critical. Actually, one of my favorite numbers to think about in any game is repeat spend. And that doesn't sound like very much. Why would you worry about repeat spend? Well, if somebody buys once, I don't know if it's any good or not. I only know if the purchase experience was good if they do it twice, 3 times, 4 times. So I want to know that I'm actually satisfying people's demand and they're interested, and therefore I can grow and scale the game. And that's really what we want to do next. We want to think about how we scale again, because by this point, we've basically launched the game. And now we're looking about how we extend, how we grow, how we scale the experience. And that's through seasonality. And ideally, we should have built such a player-focused experience that now we're trying to create schemes which allow the players to really feel they want to get their friends to join in. And if we can create programs that really validate member get member, that can be really powerful, because that's a really authentic way to scale your game as well. You'll still be doing user acquisition, you'll still be doing PR, you'll still be doing social media, all those things. But if we can now augment it by cross promotion, we can augment it by having players reach out on our behalf. The single most effective marketing method on the planet is and always will be word of mouth. Recommendation is so much. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the audience. I've talked a lot about how to incorporate thinking in testing. I haven't really talked about what marketing is or marketing channels. So let's talk a little bit about that. So I like to think about marketing as channels. I like to think about it as direct user acquisition. So that might be Facebook ads. It might be going to someone like Iron Source. It might be a campaign like, for example, PC Gamer N might have a website takeover, all of which you target people to come to the site. That's direct, traditional kind of style advertising. The reason it's called direct UA is because it's not about building up your brand necessarily. It's mostly about how many people click on it and go get a wish list or an install or whatever. Now, the difficulty is when you look at PC versus mobile. Mobile is very straightforward because I pick up my phone, I click on an ad, I install the game. That's it. That's the loop. There is no friction on mobile. Unfortunately, with PC, it's a bit more complicated. Now, there are tools out there, for example, Steam Data Suite and GameSite, that allow you to do attribution. That means tracking from source, i.e. Facebook or whatever, to the game being installed, the wish list. They're really useful. But they're also reliant on Steam or Epic supporting the data. Now, whilst Steam has improved, they now have a system mechanism called UTM, which basically allows you to track that the uninstall happens from an ad. It's not great because you have to be logged in on Steam. Now, if you're on mobile, you're not logged in on Steam. So if somebody is looking at Facebook and sees your Facebook ad and they happen to be on their phone at the time, because most of the time people watch stuff on Facebook, it's because they're looking on their phone. They go to the site, they go to Steam, and bingo, they go to a store page. But then what? They're not logged in, they can't sign up, they can't do anything. So we have some limitations with direct UI on PC, but it's improving. And there are techniques which we're experimenting with. I recently saw a team as an Indonesian accelerator I'm mentoring. I think there's a couple of people from that group here. One of the people I was mentoring for did an interesting experiment, this Facebook testing. And interestingly, by going desktop only, they got quite a reasonable number of wish lists, not at a great price, but it was surprisingly more people on the wish list from the desktop only promotion than the mobile promotion. But the mobile promotion had a lot more people interested, a lot more people clicking the button to go find out more. So I think we've got a lot of room to learn in terms of what direct UA could look like on PC, but obviously on mobile it's much easier. Hopefully that was still useful. I know I rambled a bit there. Content creators are a channel. Now, I don't want to use the word influencer. I've been told off for using that word by my community manager. In fact, I think it's also disingenuous. Don't think about content creators as influencers. They are people who have an audience. They are people who have an audience by playing games, and we want them to choose our game. We want them to authentically choose our game. We want to engage with people who are going to care about us. You can spend money on high-level content creators and have great results. Don't get me wrong. But I think it's better if you can build a relationship with content creators who have a vested interest in the success of your game. And the more they feel involved in your game, the more successful that is likely to be. However, you're not going to find big number content creators choosing your game that's new out of the block. You've got to reach out to them, make them feel comfortable, make them feel excited. And some of them, hopefully, will grow with you. Will start to build an audience because they're playing your game. And I think getting that right is going to be a tough call, but it's a really important thing to try. The app stores themselves are a form of marketing. People do still find games through that. So app store optimization, whether it is on mobile or on Steam, is still important. How we promote those games, how we use the material, the space we've got to be as effective as possible to drive people to go, yes, I want to buy it. That's what we're after. Buy it. Even if it's a free-to-play game, it's still buying into the game. We shouldn't be afraid of that language. We should be able to reach out and say, yes, we want players to want this. And actually, as a developer, we've got things we can do. We have our own social media profile. We have our own conversation. We can tell people what we're up to. We can be careful about that, true, but also we can be open about it and engage people, and get people to think about us and feel confident when they're talking to us and what we've learned as developers and what we're interested in. Authenticity is everything. And if we've also got the in-game stuff. I mentioned earlier with AppsFlyer. It's important to make sure that the first experience of the game is really critically good for retention, because it should also be good for other people to point out, look at this game, I'm playing. That's what we're after. We want people to look at the game and go, get excited about it. We want to show other people. So it's actually really important to do a lot of work in the game to communicate the values of the game, because that's what's going to retain people, and that's what's going to excite them to tell others. And like I say, we don't want just virality. We don't want just people basically selling their friends for free resources like the old Facebook game days. What we're after is for people to bond through our game, to build a proper community. And also we want to use social PR processes so we can communicate what we can do, what our values are, what we're interested in, and keep in front of people's mind. So there's a lot of material there, but let's go into a bit more sort of substance on that. So what is it? Any marketing activity is about building a story. People don't get excited by facts and figures generally, although I do, but I'm not normal. People get excited when they see something interesting, they hear a narrative, a story that they can engage and they can get lost in. So we have to build a story for the audience. We have to engage every part of their mind and really understand what their processes of thought are going to be. And one way of summarizing that is to think about a four-letter acronym, AIDA: awareness, interest, desire, action. These are kind of the four stages that we as people go through when we're trying to make decisions or to be excited about playing something. You'll notice I've added beforehand test and at the end scale. I'll explain that in a bit. But what I'm trying to get across here with this diagram, I'm not sure I do it quite right, is that throughout the journey of your marketing and development process up to launch, what we need to do is engage the community
and to use our channels of marketing to be able to make sure that we test the potential of our game and the ability for us to communicate effectively and optimize, so that when we start to build awareness, so getting people to know that we exist, to then build on that till they become interested in what we're trying to do, to build further so that interest becomes an absolute uncontrollable desire for what we're trying to do, an unquenchable need, then to trigger a call to action. Unless we give people a reason to desire and then act, people do not buy. They do not go get our game. So we need to think about all of the way we create stories and messages in this structure: awareness, interest, desire, action. Now, I've said test at the beginning, as I say, just to make sure that you can optimize and make sure that this stuff is going to work. But at the end, scale. What is scale? Scale is about understanding how you get more people doing more things more often and for longer in your game. That's how you're going to really scale. If you want real success in your game, just getting a few people to play isn't good enough. We need to see that we can grow and exponentially take that game into a different direction. That doesn't happen through just luck. Well, okay, it can. But hope, as I've often said, is not a strategy. Instead, we need to look at the channels that we can use and how we can connect the dots between all of the marketing messages we have in such a way where they resonate, where they get out to as many people as possible and become self-fulfilling. Okay, so what does that look like? So I'm going to try and take you through how I look at marketing plans. Now, this is where I've got full scope of all of the possible channels. I mentioned the channels before. And what I'm going to try and do in each month. I typically try to look at these as each one is a month. It doesn't actually quite work out this way. Some of them, say, awareness might take 2 or 3 months, and action might be a week. I mean, it does vary dramatically between each project. But as a rule of thumb, thinking about this as month by month is quite useful. So, test month. What am I trying to do? Trying to understand the audience. I'm trying to be authentic. Trying to make sure that my focus is on me as a game dev. I'm trying to show my game dev voice. I'm trying to build up trust in what I have to say. This is not about the game in the test phase with social and PR. I want to look at some very early CPI tests, the type of marketing tests I was talking about earlier, that Molly's like. I'm doing some of that. So it's very low level. It's very quiet. It's not loud and shouty about the game. In fact, we do that under a different brand name than Fundamentally Games, specifically because we want to be able to test that safely without any bias. We also try to reach out or identify at least key potential individuals who might be great content creators to work with for this kind of title, even if it's just to understand the audience better. But if we can, find ways to connect them even better. And of course, at this stage, we're just going to create a temporary website, in fact, a fake website quite often. I don't mean fake, it is still a website, and it does have the information about the game, but the links to the store won't work because the game isn't live yet, and we'll say coming soon. So it's really a placeholder. It won't be the finished site. We're going to improve it and provide more detail later. We just need something to point out, like a coming soon page. At the next stage, the next month, normally, we're going to be doing our usability testing, our UX testing. This is where we're trying to find out the net promoter score. We're also going to start maybe teasing some of the gameplay, particularly as we start recruiting users to sort of early retention tests. We're going to be looking at maybe some paid social boosts for our authentic social media around us as a game developer. We'll be looking at things like getting feedback from the content creators that we've engaged or other players. Obviously, during that period, we're still developing, we're still improving, we're still honing the game. Then we're looking at interest stage. At this interest stage, in the third month, we're now looking at, now we're fully into beta testing. Now we're planning what our live ops is going to look like. Now we're planning what beta recruitment is going to be. And we started to do that beta recruitment using social media, using PR, maybe using some direct user acquisition as well. Maybe we're trying to seed the game idea across to some content creators using things like Keymailer or some other kind of app seeding. We may be starting to build up
App Store pages so that they've got things like wish lists, or maybe we're trying to build mailing lists, sign-ups onto our temporary site. Then we move on to to the desire stage. This is the point where we're really doing all the testing of the game to make sure it's all working properly. Now we're testing the return on advertising spend. So we know, hopefully, this is ready to go. We're testing our live ops and making sure that we're ready to go. We're making sure that the beta users are feeling engaged and looked after and loved. We're starting to create some calls to action, some messages that really start to excite people about the potential of this game and that they want it and they're about to be able to get it. And we're keeping a time frame for them being able to get this game. It's coming next month, and getting that excitement, telling that story. We're looking at, maybe starting looking at paid social pushes, teaser campaigns at this stage. We're talking about maybe creating some dedicated content creator events for the people that we've engaged with us. And then we're starting to look at things like early access and stuff like that. So there's a very short time period, hopefully, not always, sometimes it's longer. I hope it's a short period of time between the creating the desire to the action, the launch. It's what we need to create a FOMO, fear of missing out. We want people to feel that they must act now. Buy one, get one free, limited stock supply. These kind of languages are really powerful, because if you don't tell me why I should do something now, I'm not going to do it. You want someone to go play your game and you don't give them a reason, don't be surprised if they don't do it. So that's why it's important to have things like scheduled events, promotions that excite people, to have a big, powerful kind of moment of time that is a launch. You're going to get one opportunity at the halo effect that comes with this kind of promotional activity. That doesn't mean you can't have later subsequent launches and stuff like that. Of course you can, but they will just be a bit harder because the players will be a bit more cynical. They may have already be fatigued by your messaging if you're not careful. So we need to think about, how we make sure we get the best effect at the coordinated point. We want to make sure we build up through social and PR activities, the hype. Act now. We need the direct UA to be as smart and targeted and as working as possible. But remember, we've already done our ROAS test. We've already worked out what messaging, what style of trailer, what information, what demographics we're targeting, what mechanisms we're using, what platforms we're using to be effective. We should have worked this out by now because we've done our return on advertising spend test. Then we can look at things like Twitch drops. So, encouraging the content creators we got involved with last month with their particular event. And now we're going to give them, if they get 100 people streaming, then they can give away, 20 keys to the first, people who put their hands up or something like that. Thinking about ways to see the audience, to create excitement, create reasons for people to go and watch the content creators that we have invested ourselves in and they've invested in us. Let's make moments for the content creators we're working with to feel special, to also make their audiences feel that this is a game that is special. And of course, what we need to make sure is we've got smart things on our store that make sense of the stage that the game is at. So Pioneer Pass, so basically a battle pass for people who bought the early access or buy the game straight out. Some other kind of special offer. We don't necessarily have to just change our reduce our sale price to get people interested in. We can do interesting packaged items with an experience, whether it's a PC or a mobile game. And then finally, scale. We need to start integrating all this stuff. We need a pipeline of features and content that's repeatable, predictable, where you know it can be delivered and will be delivered. We need daily, weekly, monthly activity that's scheduled and manageable. We need to do that in a way that we can cope with. We don't want to destroy our ability to keep supporting the game because we're just completely run ragged on the content pipeline. So we need to think carefully. What's the really important lesson about content and in-game activities and events is it just has to be predictable. It doesn't have to be big. You don't have to produce 50,000 bits of content every week. You can have one bit of content every week. You can produce, 5 bits of content a month and release one a week. You don't have to tie day on day, finish the work, release the item. Make your lives easier, but make the delivery to the player predictable and trustworthy so they know what to expect. Expectation management is everything. And integrate your social and PR ongoing with your events and promotions. integrate your direct UI with your events and promotions. Integrate your relationships with your content creators with events and promotions, and create a synergy with your VIP passes, your battle passes, so that your events and promotions drive your game going forward. Because if you've done this all in a consistent way, you will have built up a community of people who care about your game. You'll be rewarding those players who love your game with content and features that they care about. And more importantly, reasons to act on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, because the content is there for them on that daily and monthly basis. Now, the cadence for your game will be different. Every game has its own cadence. It doesn't have to be daily, weekly, monthly, but thinking of that as a starting point is a really useful way to think. So why have I done all that? Because I want you to think about your launch of your game as the start, not just the finish, but there's a build-up, a layer by layer build-up, where you're constantly testing the water, thinking about the messages, thinking about the channels that you're using to communicate to your players. And some of them are going to be direct in person through social platforms. Some of them are going to be through advertising, paid promotions. Some of them are going to be in the game, actual communication in the game. Some of them are just going to be you talking as a developer about your daily lives in a way that's authentic and charming and interesting. All of these things can contribute to the success of your experience. But it's not quite the end. We've also got to think about the players who stay with us. Retaining those players is the way to really scale. So we've got to think about our players from the point where they discover the game to the point where you've got to get them over the hump of all the barriers to them accessing a game, whether it's a paywall if you've got a pay up front game, or even if it's just having space on their hard drive, or deleting another game so they can fit it on their phone, or even just finding a space in their daily routine. All these things are barriers to people finding and acting in the game. So once they find it, you've got to give them a really clear decision. Yes, you want to go get the game. And once they've got the game, they're going to have the worst experience they're ever going to have. That's when they're learning about how the game fits into their daily routine. So we're going to help them through that process. And this is particularly precise where you've got a free-to-play game, because you've got no investment in that game. It's less so on a premium, or I prefer to say pay-up-front game nowadays, because I think premium is the wrong word. You can have premium free-to-play. You can have premium pay-up-front. You can have terrible pay-up-front, and you can have terrible free-to-play. The premium is about quality. It's not about pay-up-front. Anyway, enough of that rant. But the point I'm trying to get to is if you can handhold them, you can avoid them churning. And if you have a one-off product, that's okay. What you then need to do is think about product management. So you're managing the pricing and the engagement of the game. But if you're a live ops game, now we can re-engage the player and we can start building up more deeper relationships with that player and sustain it over a longer period of time. And maybe we'll find some people who will super engage, but that only happens if we continue to invest in the kind of ways that I've been describing in terms of events and promotions. And if we really pay attention to the life cycle of the player, we'll notice that there'll be periods of time when they're going to wane and disappear off unless we can re-engage them. And if we can find really marvelous moments of gameplay or content or feature elements that can really just tap into what those players want, that'd be great. There is a problem though with privacy issues. We've got to be really careful about how we re-engage, because we have to be very careful that we can only really support re-engagement properly if we have them opting in. So what is it we're doing to make them want to opt in to receiving messages from us so that we can support them through playing the game for longer? Again, that's the key thing here, is the emphasis on supporting them wanting to play the game for longer. That's why I think it's important to think about a game, the life of a player audience as a funnel. I've flipped the funnel on its side, but we're trying to activate users from their discovery and learning stages so they become engaged with the game. We want to think about converting them so we can get revenue from that audience in whatever form that is, whether it's pay up front or pay in game. It doesn't really matter. It still is a point of where we have to engage them and convert them and excite them. People don't hand over their cash for your game, or their time, or their eyeballs watching ads for your game, unless they actually care about your game. So let's make sure they care about the game. Let's make sure we built the game that they care about. But what's interesting, the reason why I'm talking about life cycle here is because part of your community is the relationship between the engaging game player and the super engaged player. So often what happens is super engaged players are people who are going to spend a lot of money because this game is their hobby, and they will spend money on items, or they'll spend time on building up property or exciting things. The more that they can show that off, the more excited the engaged users will be. And they're the ones that are going to tell other people about it. So super engaged players become excited because they get to stand out from the crowd. But they also become the very thing that the crowd aspire to and want to tell other people about. So understanding where each player is in the life stage of their playing experience will help you understand how you can excite and manage that community better, and to basically sustain and create heroes out of those super engaged players, because they're exciting for everybody. It's not just about getting more money out of people. That's the thing I think people misunderstand. That's why I try to stop using the word whale. We're not talking about whales here, we're talking about fans. So the more we can help fans feel special, the better, because that helps everybody in the game. That means that we can look at events, we can look at promotions, content, features, we can use it to build community. We can tap that into our marketing strategy so we can build growth, and that then leads to revenue, more events, and so on and so forth. This is a engagement engine we're building. That's why it's so important to think about marketing and community as two sides of the same experience. And actually, that's all integrated with the game itself. The game is a channel for the experience, just as much as using PR, just as much as using TikTok, just as much as using any of those platforms that we know so well. So I'm kind of there, but I'm going to chuck one more thing that I think is worth just thinking about. And that is to think about meaningful engagement. So, you know, you've got your game, it's great, but how are you making me feel special? Think about offers. Think about foreshadowing. How are you going to show off what's coming next? How can you excite people about what's coming? How can you allow people to compare it with each other? Comparison is a really powerful thing. If you look at, you know, Fortnite, why is cosmetics so powerful in Fortnite? Because I don't really see that avatar of mine. I see the back of it best, but you see it. You can look at my avatar, but I don't really see it. So comparison, why should anyone else care what I've got? I think that's a really important thing to think about. I also think unboxing is something we don't do enough of in games. That's why I've got such an old game as my example here. This is Compass Point West had a fantastic process for getting your rewards, which is basically based around poker card kind of model. But it was kind of very much in keeping with that kind of Wild West theme. And it was a really delicious feeling when you opened up the deck, particularly where you spent some in-game currency to upgrade, or you spent some real money to upgrade further. Those things were quite cool. I mean, maybe not not the best example for everything, but just thinking about the experience of untapping your rewards. And then think about consequence. Just because someone gets an upgrade doesn't mean it should always be good. My favorite example is that no one's ever going to do. I've been talking about this for 10 years. I don't think anyone's ever going to do it. Imagine we were playing Call of Duty. Okay, there's a mod, and in this mod that you have to, one person has to basically fight off everybody else wearing a loincloth, with a wooden stick as their only weapon, and a magic 9-foot tall green luminous arrow pointing at them wherever they are in the map. That's just saying how ridiculous that image would be. But imagine that that player was able to stay alive for a minute in a game of Call of Duty with that going on. Then imagine that they can buy that outfit only if they've survived for a minute, and it costs them £1,000. Don't worry about the money, I'm just throwing it out there as an example. Now, imagine that somebody turns up on the server you're playing, wearing a loincloth, with a wooden stick, and a massive 9-foot luminous arrow pointing at them wherever they are. You would be in awe, because you know the game lore says that someone who's got that is amazing. And that's what I mean by consequence. We don't always have to make things better for the player to make it more exciting. Sometimes we can show off what the player is good at by taking things away. when they choose it. That's the important bit, when they choose it. So I think it's really important to think about social capital and time versus value. And not just in-game value, but also out-of-game value. Think about kind of how we communicate that. Think about a kind of tone of voice. How do we tell a story? So whenever we're writing a press release, what are the messages that are going to resonate? How do we use language that's going to get me where? Interested, desire, and most importantly, to choose to act. You can incorporate those 4 words into your PR, into your social media exercises, the way you communicate to your community, the way the game experience works. If you can integrate those things together and test, and test, and test, you'll be able to build an effective marketing experience, effective community experience that's meaningful, that's authentic, that's engaging. And hopefully that means you'll have a much more successful game. So I think that's us done. I hopefully have taken you on a journey, shown you how we can think about the audience, how we can think about the marketing experience, and why we want to build that into our development cycle. And hopefully I've then shown you how we can look to the future post-launch, how we can look at the life cycle of players at first engagement with the game. I'd love to take any questions you guys have got. So obviously, please feel free to type away. And obviously, feel free to shout if you think I've missed anything. So I have a question here from, I think this is from Gary. Yeah. So Gary, is there a best first step for somebody who's thought little about marketing, or would this be identifying players and creators? Absolutely, that is the first step, and that's why it's there at the beginning. Until we know who we're marketing to, everything else is a waste of time. Because if I don't know what that person wants, how am I going to get the right message? You've got to think. That's why I think the persona thing is so powerful. Because if I think about argument about what he wants, I know. In my head, his a guy who lives in South London. He, like I say, works in IT support. He wanted to be an esport player, but it wasn't quite good enough. But he knew he really loved it, but never really thought he'd ever get a job in games. But he loves technology enough to still enjoy dabbling, playing, and so on and so forth. He probably plays football with his mates, maybe even like social club thing. He's probably still connected to his family. There's lots of things I know about him. It doesn't exist, but I've invented him as a thought experiment. And I can think about all of those elements about his life in my head and know that he's a stereotype that I'm playing with. And as I get more and more information about the real players, eventually I'll replace that with somebody who is more typical of the actual players I get playing the game. Does that make sense? Any other thoughts? Any other questions? I mean, I can carry on that, by the way, for hours. No, regarding another topic I raised, this is Lazara. Small studios can't afford to have a marketing team working directly with the development team, or simply have a marketing team at all. No, you can't. You are the marketing team. There's no excuse to not do marketing. You just have to do it, and that means that you as a team have to stop and think about what the shadow that you cast. So get the dev team to talk about themselves, and you as the studio head, you need to take ownership of these other pieces. And now this is one of the reasons why people will often look to publishers. That is one of the roles that publishers do. Marketing is a publisher thing, but before get back to that, before you kind of step forward, you got to think about, you want to get yourself in a position where players will trust what you have to say. And actually, I joke about marketing being evil. This is to do with the tradition, and I think Jason's
Arkansas, so he will know exactly where I'm coming from. There was and it is an era of game development, particularly in the AAA scene, where the developers were completely isolated from marketing, and they basically built a game, whether it was any good, whether it was appropriate for an audience or not, then they threw it over to marketing, and it was marketing's fault. Therefore, marketing are evil. It's not true. Marketing can only do what they can do. Proper marketing, and I say that as an actual trained marketeer, is about identifying and satisfying consumer or player needs. Think about that. Identifying and satisfying consumer needs. It's not, can we squeeze cash out of people? Game design equals marketing. Jason, you know I agree with you entirely. So game design is marketing. It's the first P. The first P of marketing is product. Product, price, place, promotion. As a marketing person, a proper, fully rounded marketing person, it's not just communications. It's understanding the design that you're working with. It's understanding the price needs of the people that you're working with. So thinking about pricing strategies, structures, exchange that's not about money, reputation, all of these other things are part of the marketing strategy. So marketing is not evil. I know I joked about it, but it is not. I don't necessarily agree with that, Jason. Genre selection, your most critical marketing decision. Okay, Jason's not wrong here. However, I have a slightly different view on it because I'm not particularly worried about traditional genres. Because what does a genre mean? Where I think we actually do agree is genre is really what is the expectation of the players. And it's actually, I think, part and parcel of the persona of the people you're targeting. So in some ways, what we've traditionally called genre selection, which has been a really important focus for marketing strategies for games in general, because I'm going to make a first-person shooter, I'm going to make a match 3. These are really clean, identifiable markers for what the game is, which are shorthand for anyone who's in the industry to understand. They're also shorthand for how we target other people. But I think they're obfuscating a deeper truth, which is who we're making the game for. They are a great shorthand because they provide a whole bunch of material, but it's so manipulatable. Alina, you're saying great presentation. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Are there any great templates for marketing strategies we can use to be inspired? E.g., what chapters does it consist of? Actually, yeah, there's a whole section. In fact, I think we still have, it probably needs to be updated because we haven't updated it for about 3 or 4 years. Actually, maybe a bit less than that, maybe 3 years. But there is on the knowledge base. So if you go to fundamentally.games, there's a knowledge base. On that knowledge base, you'll find some templates. I think there's still a marketing planning template there. But to be honest, it does need to be updated. And don't worry, I will send over this deck for you. The problem I have, Elena, is it's difficult to keep track of all of the really good marketing campaigns, mostly because most campaigns have 2 or 3 spectacular things and about 10 things I really wish they didn't do. And the trouble is, I'm not really after a realistic example. I want to give the best examples. And of course, a lot of that is subjective as well. So that's why I don't tend to give really hard examples. What I'm hoping to do is inspire you to think more generally. But I'm very happy to sort of talk about these in more detail. So if people want to reach out to me afterwards and ask me what I think about certain campaigns, I'm more than happy to try and help with that. But as I say, there is a template you can download on the fundamental.games site. You will all get copies of these slides, and basically we'll also be putting up the recording onto YouTube so that you can all see it again later as well, assuming you want to hear my dulcet tones once more. Any more questions? I think I put everything so far. Cool, so it seems like we're there. Well, what I'll just add to you whilst I'm here. So obviously, Fundamental Games is a living game publisher. That means we're looking for games that are living. If you think your game is a retention-focused one and you're interested in talking to somebody about potentially publishing it, let us know. We are very much focused on live ops. We're very much focused on getting involved early enough to make a difference. That's why we kind of look at games early and
if you have something you want to share with us, we'll do a free review. So if it's a living game, and that means we'll look at your market fits, your game mechanic, we'll look at the retentions design and the monetization design, and give you active feedback that you can take away and use, regardless of whether you work with us or not. And so far, we seem to be getting pretty good feedback from developers that this is a useful, practically useful thing. Obviously, feel free to reach out to other people who've used this to find out. Don't take my word for it. We've also got a financer list. That means a list of all the people who are active investing. This is primarily focused around the UK, but it is more general as well. We've also got more items. I mentioned the knowledge base. So fundamentally games, fundamentally .games/knowledge base, you'll find that there is a selection of material on there. Previous webinars, other articles we've written. Basically, we're trying to gradually share everything you wanted to know about game design but never dared to ask. In fact, I've literally started off a podcast with the Game Dev London folks where I'm literally talking about that very topic. Hoping to record one with Rami Ishmael later this week. Anyway, so that's us. So we are, like I say, Living Games Publisher. We're all about bringing games to life. We're all about engaging with developers and doing that process that I talked to you about. Testing the game before you sink your kitchen sink into it, your life, your kids, your family, whatever it is, into the process. We want to help you work out when to say no, when to stop, but also how to optimize, how to improve, how to get yourself ready so that you can have the best success possible. But whether you are making that kind of game or not, I'm hoping that you can take away from today, think about the audience. Think about how you can communicate and build an audience whilst you're making the game, and use that opportunity to test and practice so that you can make the mistakes, find the right messaging, find what works before it really has to work. And make sure you test your return on advertising spend before you then kick off your launch. But once you've launched, that is not the end. You need to build and sustain and continue to engage. And I think that's us done. Thank you all for coming. Please feel free to reach out to us if you want any more information. If you thought this was good, great, thank you. I will be sending out a feedback form. We're always looking for ways to improve this process. We're definitely keen to find ways to help developers wherever we can. It's really important to us that we engage with developers so that everybody can make better games, because that's really what this is about. We just have a love for making really great experiences for as many people as possible. And see you all soon. I'm actually probably not going to make it to Develop Gary. I'm still feeling a bit reclusive at the moment. So, but I'm sure I will see you soon. It won't be long before I find my way coming out. So, anyway, catch you all soon, folks. Thank you very much.